Welcome back. I have a very special guest today. This is Tracey, and she is joining us from Scotland. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear her story and hear how things are in another country. I know the last time I got to talk to somebody, it was Brazil, and it was so cool. So I can't wait. I'm going to stop talking and let her introduce herself. So this is Tracey.
Hi there, everyone. It's nice to be able to share my experiences, and I'm hoping that they can take something from it. I think we've all, across the world, Turner Syndrome girls are connected in a shared experience, but hopefully, as you said, from a different country, it might have a slightly different perspective. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So first off, I'm always curious to hear the story of how everybody's diagnosed. So how were you diagnosed?
Well, I was actually diagnosed at birth. It was a swollen foot that had directed the doctor's attention to it. And I was tested then, and so I've known my entire life, and my family's known my entire life as well. I feel quite lucky having known so early on, because I do hear from some of the other girls who were a bit later in life, and having not had the information from the outset, it can be a bit frightening, it can be a bit scary, but that's why we're here, I guess, to share their experiences and help each other out in that way. But it wasn't very well known. I'm 35 now, and it wasn't a particularly well-known condition then. It's, from my experience, it's still not particularly well known. It's hard to find, unless you go searching for it specifically, it's hard to come into contact with other girls with Turner syndrome. So it was a lot of learning had to be involved with my parents, and learning how to cope with it, what to expect from it, what it could mean from the best scenario to the worst, and just learn to cope with it, really. So as I grew up, I was going from stage to stage and just learning as I went along, rather than being bombarded with all the information at once, and right up to puberty, and then of course into adulthood. So yep, a lifelong known person.
So when you were diagnosed, were the results classic or mosaic?
Mosaic.
Okay. Very interesting. That is your foot being the red flag. That is not one I've heard before, but that makes a lot of sense. I know my mom talks about fighting, like my hands and feet being puffy when I was little, so that's definitely a very common thing.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the biggest way having Turner syndrome impacts your life?
The biggest drawback, or biggest challenge, I suppose, would be the fertility issues that tend to come along with it. Being mosaic, I'm lucky enough to have not had too many other underlying symptoms. I know a lot of girls can have issues with their hearts. I do myself have a heart issue, but there could be lots of other underlying things which I'm lucky enough not to be held back with. But the infertility issue, I think, is something that affects all of us. And when you talk to other girls, and when you're on the forums and things like that, it seems to be the biggest problem that comes up. It seems to be the biggest concern a lot of them have. And last year, a friend of mine was doing a sociology study down in England, and she was looking at how it affects the girls and their families, the mothers in particular, from a sociological point of view, which was quite interesting to learn. And having found out so early, I believe I was about 12 years old when I found out that Turner syndrome could mean in fertility issues. And obviously I was upset at the time, but because I was so young, you weren't thinking about having a family, you weren't really considering that at all. And so it's something that I've coped with. I happen to have 8 nieces and nephews, so they keep me busy anyway. But unfortunately, I can see why it would affect a lot of the other girls more, and why they would yearn for something to be done with it. The lucky thing is there's so many more options nowadays. For starters, the classic family setup is changing, and the available options, the treatments and other routes that you can go are opening up as well all the time. So it's not a be-all, end-all by any stroke of the imagination. But as for me and for, I would say, most of the girls, that seems to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's not, I almost feel like those types of struggles, the infertility, the struggling in school, you know, the more mental instead of physical struggles
Yeah.
are almost the hardest because there's not something physically you can see and do something about. It's more
Yeah.
work to navigate. And
Mm-hmm.
oh man. So as far as options, you are absolutely right. There's, oh my gosh, more options nowadays than I know my mom has said she could have ever dreamed of me having. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know in the States, the biggest ones are adoption, whether it's through foster care or through an adoption agency. And then there's, for most, IVF with egg donation. For some,
Mm-hmm.
just IVF. Um, what options are there in Scotland?
Well, like yourself, adoption is a big option, and the fostering system in Scotland is really remarkable. From what I've learned, I've not actually went into it myself, and so I wouldn't want to give any particular details. But from what I've researched, it is a pretty remarkable system that's set up. And as a youngster, it was always, if when I did think about having a family, I always thought it would be nice to offer a home or a family to a child that really, really needs it. IVF is also an option as well, and my doctor has also said to me that if I ever wanted to discuss it in more depth, then by all means to let them know. For the moment, for myself, that's not really the case, but it's good to know that that's there, and it does comfort you to know that that's there should the situation arise.
Yeah. So does your doctors that you found, do they have a lot of available resources as far as Turner's goes?
There are not many, to be honest. One of my general practitioners that I went to, when I told them that I was Turner syndrome and I needed to refer to a clinic, because I'd just moved practice at the time, and I needed to refer to the Release clinic, she had to actually look up what Turner syndrome was. She'd never heard of it before. And myself, when I was at university studying medical science, and we only did briefly touch on Turner syndrome. There wasn't a lot of teaching involved in it, and there's not a lot of information out there unless you really look for it. It just gives you, usually you'll find that it just gives you the basics on what it is, what causes it, and some of the underlying symptoms. That is why I set up my charity group, Ragdoll UK, because when I was a couple of years back, I was doing another interview, and a woman got in touch with me afterwards, and she said that she was so glad that she'd heard of someone else that had Turner syndrome. And at the time at the interview, I was discussing what I did with my life and all those various things, and she said it was such a comfort to know that, and it made her their young girl who had Turner syndrome happy to know that as well. So I thought, well, I need to get the group together. I need to get information out there as best I can, because we're still a small charity at this point, but we try and reach as many people as we can as possible, just to let them know that there is other people there with it, and there are resources available for it. You just need to look in the right places.
That's amazing. So you said it's Ragdoll UK?
Ragdolls UK, yeah.
I will try to link it. That is awesome. Um, that's really cool. And I found the same thing. there's something very special about being able to have that connection with others.
Yeah.
Oh man. So have you found that there's a large population in Scotland as far as girls who have Turner syndrome?
I suppose it would depend on what you would consider a large population. As I said, most of the time we get people get in touch and say we'd never heard of it and looking for more information on it. Not necessarily because they know someone that has it or they've been diagnosed with it, but just because it's a condition that's turned up that they're actually interested in hearing more about. So spreading the word, obviously, hopefully we'll find more girls who can come to us and really reach out and be able to support one another, because that's really what it's all about. We have each other to rely on.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that the more stories I hear, the more I not feel less scared of Turner's, but I just, there's something about understanding it a little better that's so comforting.
Yeah.
And what was your, I know you mentioned that you kind of took it stage by stage, piece by piece, with learning about all the different aspects of it. What would you say was the piece that you learned? I know you mentioned infertility being the one of the bigger struggles, but was there a piece of information, a piece of how it worked, something like that impacted you the most?
Probably the heart issues. As I said, I have discoordination of the heart valves in the left ventricle, I believe it is. So when I was younger, obviously I didn't fully understand what that meant, the impact of that, and I had various different hospital appointments. You'll know that yourself. You go see this doctor, that doctor, this doctor. Yeah. So as a youngster, all I really knew was that I was going to the doctors a lot. And the heart issue was what really, that's what, and it still is what makes my parents the most nervous. They're always quite fussy about it. I want to make sure that I keep up with my cardiology appointments, always make sure that I'm trying my best to take care of myself, not eating too much junk food and all that. So I would say that if outside the infertility, I'd probably say that the heart issues can be quite intimidating. That can be quite a big thing to take on as well, especially if it's an ongoing thing that really needs to be kept a check on. Yeah. Because when I was about 9 or 10, I think it was, I had to go into the hospital for a cannula operation where one of the arteries had narrowed. So that's actually when my gran knitted me a ragdoll to keep me company whilst I was in, and which is why the group's named Ragdoll UK. So as I said, I remember that, and it was quite frightening, and that's why it's important that we're there with as much information and support as we can be, really.
Yeah. That's so cute. That's awesome. Yeah, and especially with things constantly changing, trying to stay up on the most current can feel a little overwhelming at times.
Yeah. Well, given the current COVID situation that's changing so frequently, we're getting a few messages with girls who are frightened. It's like, are we, particularly susceptible? Are we vulnerable? And all we can keep saying at the moment, because it keeps changing so quickly and everything's moving so fast, so we can say is Turner syndrome itself doesn't make you more vulnerable, but some of the underlying conditions is, you might want to look at and keep extra special care, and by all means take advice from the doctors and whatever they are saying. As I said, because it's not just about obviously keeping physically healthy, but there's a mental health situation involved as well, and having to stay in and live in that worry is not good for everyone. So it's just as best trying to keep as much normality and get on with it as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I think that's been the hardest part of this whole thing for me has been the whole mental health aspect of
Mhm.
being stuck inside. And when you when you don't have things you can do to keep yourself busy, oh man, it can get really hard.
Yeah.
What have you found has helped you the most during all of this?
Well, I usually work from home anyway, so I'm quite lucky that I've not been upset too much in that respect. But usually I would go to the gym, I would go and get a coffee out somewhere else, physically meeting up with people. Um, I haven't seen my nieces and nephews since way before Christmas, and I usually see them quite regularly, so I'm missing them. But just try and keep your head in the game and keep getting on with it, I suppose. Go on my daily walk around the park, which hasn't been easy recently because we've just had a really strong bout of ice here in Scotland, so it's like a skating rink as you're
Oh,
going out. So
yeah, walks. I thankfully where we are, we have some good hiking trails that we can use. But oh man, it's if we didn't have that, it would be really hard. And the weather lately has been up and down.
mm.
And this happened in the beginning of all of this too. In March, we had like a ton of rain. So not only could we not go into town, but we couldn't really go outside either. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Well,
Okay.
the first lockdown we had here in Scotland was back in March, and it kind of led on to spring and summer, so it wasn't so bad because you could go and sit out. But Scottish weather, you grab that 2 minutes of the sunshine, and that's it for the rest of the year. So
So how have you found the healthcare system in Scotland to be as far as addressing those various concerns with Turners? Has it been something that's pretty easy to navigate or um, maybe a little difficult? What has that been like for you?
for my individual experience, I have been very, very lucky because we have the NHS here, and they have taken great care of me from birth up till now and even ongoing. They are brilliant. The doctors that I'm put in contact with, the nurses, staff, everybody has been amazing. One of the doctors I attended when I was a youngster, Dr. Donaldson, he's a specialist in Turner syndrome, and he was magnificent. He was a doctor that sat and explained everything to me, and he did it in such a brilliant way that it was easy to absorb, it was easy to understand, and easy to prepare myself for. So I've been very, very lucky that way, very lucky. And my current cardiologist, he's brilliant as well. I'll have a phone call with him at some point in this month because we can't go into the clinics. We're not going into the clinics in person unless it's obviously some kind of emergency or really necessary. So we'll sit and we'll have our annual chat as we do, catch up.
That's great. So it sounds like you have a cardiologist you regularly see. Is there any other specialists besides the cardiologist that you see yearly or regularly?
Usually, I would have annual visits to the cardiologist and the endocrinologist who would deal with the Turner syndrome in general and anything else that might come up, keep a check on things like the kidneys and things like that, and a general health check for myself. Otherwise, it would be the general practitioner then that I would go to, any other things that turn up.
Okay. So, what was your experience like with when you were growing up? Did you have to take hormone replacement therapy or anything?
Yeah, I did. I took growth hormone injections from the age of about 2, I believe, up until I was a preteen, I think it was. Then I was put on to the hormone replacement therapy, and I've been on that ever since. The growth hormone injections worked wonders for me, I suppose, because I'm 5'1", which isn't as tall as any of my brothers, obviously. They're all big 6-footers, but for me, it's, you know, a decent height.
Yeah. No, that's great. I remember when I was little, my goal was always just at least 5 foot.
Yeah.
And I got just under it. So have you found it, how do I want to word this? I have had to try a lot of different HRT to find what works for me. Have you found in your experience you've been on the same one, or have you tried different ones too?
I've been on the same one, and luckily it's not had any adverse effects or anything like that. So I've been on it for quite a while. I think I've been on it since I first started puberty. I started with the ethyl estradiol, the estrogen replacement, and then they added the progesterone later on, and it's been me ever since. It's just been a regular thing. So
yeah, that's good. I was trying to think of if there was any specific questions that I'm forgetting. I always try to make sure I have a certain set of questions. I guess the biggest thing I always like to hear everybody's story on is what ways they've felt like Turner syndrome has changed them, has like the lessons that you've learned through having Turner syndrome. What would you say has been the biggest thing having Turner syndrome has taught you?
Well, it's taught me that I'm a lot stronger than I realise, because I have met some of the girls, and from early age they've been told, you won't be able to do this, you can't do that, this will be affected, that will be affected, so on and so forth. And it's obviously you need to learn these things, that goes without saying, but it's just the way that it can be bombarded can be unfortunate. So I've been lucky in the respect that I was like, okay, maybe I can't do this, but I'll do that. I can't do this, but I'll do that. The saying about the challenges in school, I always struggled a bit with maths, which is a common thing among us, I think. Common thing amongst most people, to be honest. But I had a lovely teacher who would sit patiently with some extra time and help me make sure that I kept up to date with everything. So as I said, I guess it made me want to challenge myself more and learn more about myself and what I'm capable of. And not just that, it's obviously helping other people realise that it's not a be-all, end-all. It's unfortunate part of you, but you know, it can drive you on. It can be used as a force to make you a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I always try to remind myself when I'm feeling like the weight of all of the things that it means look different or hard for me. Is kind of like, well, but you've beaten worse stuff in the past. So
yeah.
So I'm also curious, you said you have, I can't remember how you described it. You had a heart condition that was something to do with the left ventricle.
Yeah.
What age did you find that out, and what was the red flag for that?
To be honest, I would have been too young to actually remember what the red flag would have been, but there's a slight murmur to my heartbeat, you know, so it's a slight bum 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 bum. There's a discoordination of the beat, so that would, I'd imagine that would have been picked up quite early on as well, as the doctors listened to it, because it could be heard quite clearly with the doctors. So they're always, it's easy enough to pick up. So as I said, I would imagine that would have been quite early on when first the initial checks were done. Luckily, it's not affected me too much, apart from the narrowing of the artery, which was taken care of, and that's kept a check on quite regularly in case it happens again. But for luckily, I've not had any other issues with it, so it's just one of those things.
So just something that they keep an eye on now.
Yeah.
That's good. So you had surgery for coarctation then?
Yeah.
What age was that at? Do you remember that?
I think that was about 9 or 10, I believe I was. I was still quite young, so I think it was done about then.
What was the recovery like at that age from that?
Well, actually, I had a great surgeon, and the next day I was lying in the hospital bed, and I said to him, I need to go to the bathroom. He's like, well, you're not an invalid, get up. So the recovery was quite easy.
That's
It didn't
great.
hold me back for very long.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think with that being the most intimidating thing, I always think about how that could feel at different ages too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the different parts of Turner's, I feel like can be such different experiences depending on what age you are when you
Mm-hmm.
go through it. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been so great getting to talk to you and getting to hear your story. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? I will make sure to link Ragdolls UK.
Mm-hmm. Oh, just a note to say that all the Turner's girls that I've met, every single one of them, were all tough cookies, and it's all about supporting each other and getting on with it. So keep up it.
Thank you so much for chatting with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yep, you too. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.